things will never be the same, because the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
Is it worth believing in the DCEU anymore? Now, I know this question seems overly dramatic, but trust me, I'm asking this question out of curiosity and out of a place of concern. Also, I want to point out that this is a different style of video than what I usually do, but I genuinely felt like it was time to have an honest discussion about the DCEU. With the continued success of DC's singular, gritty yet realistic style films, which, yes, I'm talking about both Joker and the Batman, I've begun to question how much I actually want more DCEU styled movies, or if I even want the DCEU to continue in general. Unfortunately, in the most DC fashion possible, they once again made a decision that actually emphasized these thoughts and emotions. And no, it's not just because of the Batman's recent praise and success, it's because firstly, every single DCEU project besides Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which was actually pushed forward to a much earlier date, has been pushed back tremendously. And secondly, Ezra Miller has now proven that they aren't going to be reliable for WB/DC going forward anymore, which now of course prompts the question, what the hell should they do about the Flash in the DCEU going forward? What's frustrating is that every time we get to a point where we can accept the DCEU for what it is and think to ourselves, okay, now DC is going to really get their shit together, get good with making these DCEU styled films, and show us that they learned how to make a good cinematic universe, we're always reminded why we shouldn't ever think that. Don't get me wrong, I do care about the upcoming DCEU movies, and I want to make sure that I emphasize that. It's not like I suddenly hate those movies or think that none of those movies will turn out to at least be good movies, or that I think those upcoming movies are going to be total failures in the same vein of Wonder Woman 1984, besides possibly The Flash. It's just that I'm beginning to question if it's worth DC continuously attempting to try at this whole Marvel-like cinematic universe when they clearly have a newfound style that actually works for them and is a much better formula for DC's brand as a whole. You know, a style that people actually enjoy, a style that can be used time and time again for a new iteration of a hero or villain, big or small, and still somehow feel fresh. An actually different style that doesn't feel like DC is trying to chase Marvel's success, a style that can represent DC Comics on the big screen, and most importantly, a style that people can immediately associate with DC in the same vein that people can identify a Marvel movie without any hesitation. For dramatic effect, I'm going to ask a question that of course I'll provide an immediate answer to, but this question is something that I love for you, the viewers, to reply to in the comments below. What is the biggest problem with the DCEU? In my opinion, beyond the rocky start with Zack Snyder's original vision, beyond the continuous ongoing discussions of restoring the Snyderverse that still haunts the DCEU, and beyond the success of both Joker and the Batman, the DCEU is straight up broken at its core. There is no actual communication from DC regarding their plans for the DCEU. There is no clear continuity. There is no clear and concise vision that's being built across the DCEU long term. Beyond being a fan of DC superheroes in general, if we're being real, there is no real reason to ever truly get invested into the DCEU, and that sucks. DC simply taking it as one movie at a time without any real connection between each movie, despite wanting the DCEU to be like Marvel's MCU, which should be a good thing, it really should, but it's not. It's just that in the cinematic universes of the Batman and Joker, that sense of these movies are telling an isolated story while showcasing entirely different iterations of Gotham felt like it had a meaning and a real reasoning behind it. For instance, in Joker, Gotham is used to show how a city can break a man enough to where he crumbles internally, thus leading Arthur Fleck turning, or more so, devolving into the Joker character. In the Batman, Gotham itself is a character that grows and changes over time. It's a character that affects the main story of the movie, along with affecting other threads that were left incomplete due to the Batman spin-off shows that'll continue to tell those stories of that universe. The point is that these movies take place in the same city that are designed entirely differently, and it actually works in the context of both movies. The sense of each movie being isolated both story-wise and universally plays as a strength to those movies, because we only need to care about what's going on in those movies due to their respective stories. So why doesn't a similar approach also play as a strength for the DCEU? The DCEU is a cinematic universe that somehow, after 9 years of existence, still isn't a cinematic universe. And yes, I know, it's easy for people to immediately jump onto the, well, technically, this is all Zack Snyder's fault train of thought. However, I don't think that's a fair criticism anymore. Let's discuss this "it's all Zack Snyder's fault" narrative. Yes, I don't like Man of Steel. Yes, Suicide Squad was abysmal. Yes, Batman v Superman, the theatrical cut, was disappointing. And yes, Justice League was awful as well. However, when you look at every single one of those movies, there's pretty much a reasonable excuse as to why these movies were bad now. Man of Steel isn't good, and that's primarily because of Zack Snyder's inability to tell a positive Superman story, and it was the first movie of his DC career. So, of course, he wasn't gonna start off making complete bangers as we expect from the MCU now. There's a learning curve to making superhero movies, and while yes, I think Man of Steel sucked, I don't think it's entirely fair to hold that movie over his head anymore. Oh, and the screenwriter for Man of Steel publicly spoke about receiving a no from a studio executive that literally made no sense at all, so you know that from the get-go there was gonna be some sort of bullshit with this cinematic universe. Secondly, Suicide Squad was primarily ruined by studio interference, and it wasn't even Zack Snyder's movie. That was David Ayer's movie, and we now know from David Ayer, the director of Suicide Squad, that his movie was butchered by studio executives. Now, before people think that I personally think that a full director's cut version of Suicide Squad would be good, trust me, I don't think that. Suicide Squad 2016 is pretty much unsalvageable, especially now with the success of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which is a far better movie. With James Gunn's new take on the Suicide Squad, people simply don't care to see what could have been with David Ayer's official cut of Suicide Squad, unfortunately. Thirdly, once again, Batman v Superman was also ruined by studio executives. In fact, we have it on record from the movie screenwriter that 30 minutes of Batman v Superman had to be cut, which ruined the movie's narrative. Of course, this was confirmed later on when we got Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, which fixed a lot of the narrative issues and was a pretty good movie that wasn't mind-blowing and could have still been better. Fourthly and finally, the failure of Justice League wasn't Zack Snyder's fault. Like, there's a reason why Zack Snyder's Justice League is called Zack Snyder's Justice League and why people call the original Justice League Justice League. It's because when Zack Snyder had to walk away from the production of that movie due to unfortunate circumstances, that movie was handed over to Jeff Johns and Joss Whedon. They're the reason that Justice League sucked, not Zack Snyder. Oh, and the one movie that was tremendously successful during the Snyderverse era, Wonder Woman, had all of its credit given to its director, Patty Jenkins. Most people probably don't know this, but Zack Snyder helped write the story for Wonder Woman. So, technically, he does deserve some credit for the success of that movie as well. And despite saying all of this, I want to emphasize I'm not specifically defending Zack Snyder's bad movies. What I'm trying to get at is that I know how easy it is to fully use Zack Snyder as the scapegoat when it comes to discussing the failures of the DCEU. However, there's more things that also contributed to Man of Steel, Suicide Squad, Batman v Superman, and Justice League being bad movies, along with Zack Snyder's creative ideas or decisions. That's all. This, of course, brings me to the post-Snyderverse era and its core problem, the lack of any sense of direction or world building. Outside of James Gunn's projects, which actually feel like they matter because James Gunn is clearly crafting his own corner in the DCEU, none of the other DCEU projects feel like they are actually building towards something. James Gunn, understandably, is essentially being given free reign from DC. I mean, come on, the dude basically made Peacemaker the most popular and arguably the most enjoyed DC project in literal years. Like most people, you can easily sign me up for any James Gunn DC related project, but as for the rest of the DCEU stuff, I can't help but ask, do any of these non-James Gunn related DCEU projects even matter anymore? And while most people would understandably say, well, yeah, of course those upcoming projects matter, why would DC bother releasing these upcoming DCEU movies if they didn't feel like they matter? I obviously understand that response or train of thought, but I don't necessarily think that I agree with it. It's because none of the upcoming DCEU movies feel like they're going to hold any actual weight anymore. For reference, this was seemingly the short-term plan for the DCEU, make solo superhero movies that are essentially standalone with very little connective tissue via Easter eggs, and not worry about an overarching problem, let alone allowing a movie to affect the DCEU timeline, which, fine, that makes total sense after the failure of the Snyderverse. Let's not worry about a timeline, and let's not worry about trying to actually build towards something because we just tried and failed horribly. Let's sit back, just make a bunch of movies that tell their own stories for these characters we want to popularize, and see where it goes. Fine, that's a simple enough idea for people to get behind and fully understand or appreciate until you realize that there's an elephant in the room that we need to discuss. Yes, that's right, it's time to finally talk about the problem with the Flash's movie. I'm gonna be real here, I've never been a fan of DC deciding to use Flashpoint for the very first Flash movie story. And if you didn't know, both according to the teaser trailer and the rumors swirling, for all intents and purposes, the Flash movie is being used to clean the timeline up. This not only feels unearned, but it also just feels like a story that would be better to build up towards, or at least have some sort of momentum leading towards it, rather than just going, yeah, no, this cinematic universe is screwed, we need to do the story ASAP to salvage bits and pieces of this universe. Despite my understanding that this is the only seemingly logical choice for DC, I can't help but feel like it's still going to be useless in the long run. For example, what's the point in doing this Flashpoint storyline that's supposed to shuffle the DCEU around when you have The Rock constantly saying the same phrase for Black Adam's marketing, which makes it seem like it's going to be a bigger or more effective movie than The Flash?
Things will never be the same, because the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
What's the point of bringing back Michael Keaton as Batman in The Flash if DC isn't going to seemingly do a full-on Batman Beyond storyline? Once again, Michael Keaton has already been confirmed for Batgirl. In fact, Leslie Grace spoke about meeting him in an interview with Variety. Plus, rumors have it that Michael Keaton is going to end up being Batgirl's mentor in the Batgirl movie, so it's almost like a pseudo Batman Beyond movie. That's not to say that a full-on Batman Beyond project would solve any problems, but it's a project that the DC fanbase would legitimately rally behind, considering people love Batman Beyond. Sure, nostalgia does sell, as proven by Spider-Man No Way Home, and yes, it'll be hyped to see Michael Keaton back as Batman, but Michael Keaton's return isn't going to have the same effect as Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's appearances in Spider-Man No Way Home. Look, I love Batman 89, in fact, I've made a video about it and talked about how perfect it was in my Batman 89 video. However, Michael Keaton's Batman coming into the DCEU DCEU won't be as nearly as exciting as Tobey and Andrew Spider-Man entering the MCU to help Tom Spider-Man. The magic behind Spider-Man No Way Home is because it was a victory lap. That movie created a full circle moment for Marvel fans, Spider-Man fans, and both Tobey and Andrew. On top of that, both franchises had studio drama that ended up affecting their respective movies, which led to so many of us feeling like both Tobey and Andrew deserved better. Spider-Man No Way Home resolved this feeling or history by creating a redemption arc for these beloved actors and characters who we all thought deserved better. So of course, No Way Home was always going to emotionally land with us. Plus, it also helped that Marvel knew what they were doing after years of experience creating their movies and perfecting their movie formula. And obviously, they put their everything into it because making that happen meant as much to them as it did to us. In the case of DC's plan of bringing back Michael Keaton into the DCEU, it's not nearly the same. It just feels like DC saw No Way Home's success and thought, let's do that too so we can solve our non-Batman having DCEU problem. It'll definitely work in the same vein as No Way Home. And it's like, no, it probably won't. You've yet to prove to us that you can make amazing DCEU movies, let alone an amazing victory lap for an already celebrated fan favorite Batman actor, Michael Keaton. Like, Michael Keaton is already typically deemed the live action Batman, just like Kevin Conroy is deemed as the definitive voice for Batman. And it's even worse when you think about the fact that DC is relying on Michael Keaton's Batman to be the hype part of their upcoming Flash movie. Like, think about it. They're relying on bringing back an old man Batman to do the heavy lifting for their first ever Flash movie. Is that not absolutely absurd? While we're still talking about this Flash movie, I have to say it, it's time for the Flash to be recast going forward. Ezra Miller absolutely needs to go, and Warner Brothers needs to make this decision as soon as possible. Ezra Miller has proven to be nothing but problematic. It's absolutely not worth dealing with their bullshit anymore, and for the sake of literally everybody's sanity, they're better off getting rid of them. First, it was having a serious altercation with a woman that led to them choking said woman. Now, Ezra Miller has been arrested twice in Hawaii, both for separate problematic reasons. One reason was for disorderly conduct, and the other reason was that they threw a chair at a woman, which led to said woman getting hit on the head. I don't care how enjoyable Ezra Miller was in Zack Snyder's Justice League. I simply don't understand how WB can continue to push forward with them. The fact that there are now several different situations where their star actor is going out and physically hurting random people for seemingly random reasons is beyond me. It's not like any of us are truly attached to Ezra Miller's iteration of The Flash because they've only shined in one movie. You can easily get rid of them. There's quite literally little to no emotional attachment or investment with Ezra's Flash, and I highly doubt that this upcoming Flash movie will change that feeling. I don't care if we have to bring in Grant Gustin, which, I mean, absolutely no offense to him, I absolutely loved him in the earlier seasons of The Flash, when you know the show was actually about Barry Allen, not Team Flash. WB has to do whatever it takes to turn the page on this chapter of Ezra Miller's iteration of Barry Allen and recast this role with someone who they can actually rely on going forward. And I just want to point out that I absolutely know and understand that this changes nothing in the Flash movie. They can't just reshoot the movie. That requires way too much time and money for DC to fully go through with that logically. Plus, the movie is already shot. They're just waiting for visual effects studios to free up because there are so many visual effects shots in The Flash. It's quite literally impossible to call in an actor and be like, hey man, we need to reshoot this entire movie. That's just not happening. However, if they want to act upon this news, there's still one viable option: their use of the Flash's post-credit scene. All DC really needs to do is pull a Shazam post-credit scene, which, just to remind you, they literally just had a stunt double put on a Superman suit for a Superman appearance, except the head of Superman was cut off since they still can't figure out what to do with Superman in the DCEU. They can literally do a very similar, if not the exact same thing in The Flash, except it's like we see Barry running over to Aquaman and Aquaman being like, wait, you're not our Flash, but what do you want? Or something like that before their conversation even begins. I don't know, man. I'm just throwing an idea out there. But the point is, DC absolutely has the option to make a creative decision that allows them to pivot from Ezra going forward. Whether it's changing up the originally planned ending or doing it via a totally different post-credit scene, the option is still there despite reshooting the entire movie not being a logical decision. The question, however, becomes, do I think that it'll happen? Honestly, probably not. But if DC wants to win the people over and wants to actually prove that they're willing to make hard decisions that positively affect the DCEU long term and actually make their fan base happy, this is their time to show us. Finally, this brings me to the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery's 5-point plan for fixing the long-term vision of the DCEU. Look, I don't want to be overly negative about this potential overhaul plan for DC Entertainment, but a lot of it is easier said than done. The biggest positive out of these points is the fact that the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery realizes that DC lacks any creative vision whatsoever. That is the biggest takeaway here, because we as fans have been saying this for years. It's been arguably the #1 thing we have preached time and time again. A coherent creative vision for the DCEU is all we've pretty much asked for the last several years, and it's why so many people can get behind Matt Reeves' The Batman universe. He has a vision, he talks to the fans, he explains his ideas and leaves hints as to where things are heading project and universe-wise for the Batman. So to see that be a key point in all of this makes me genuinely happy. However, what doesn't make me happy, despite knowing that DC needs this and knowing that I've said this in the past, is the fact that DC needs a Kevin Feige-like figure is such a big point for them. Why? It's simple, really. It's because that's so much easier said than done. You can't just pick a director and be like, congrats, you're close enough to Kevin Feige, which means you're in charge of the entirety of this broken cinematic universe. The success of Kevin Feige and the MCU didn't happen overnight. There were a lot of growing pains, there were a lot of changes, and Kevin Feige finding a formula that works took years of tinkering. Plus, it took Marvel intaking a lot of feedback from their fans and slowly beginning to form the fun communication they have now, even if it's them giving subtle hints or specifically not answering questions because it'll be answered in a later MCU project. And the problem is, I don't know if DC can earn that same trust, even if they tried, at least with the DCEU related stuff. The reason people believe in Matt Reeves is not only because of the aforementioned things I've said, but The Batman was a legitimately good movie and Matt Reeves is getting to do his own thing. It's his vision and his plans that DC is enabling and less of DC controlling his plans. That is Matt Reeves' universe, and that's why we care about the Batman's universe or anything related to the upcoming The Batman related projects. Even if Warner Bros. Discovery picks out a Kevin Feige-like figure, have said figure plan out the entire new DCEU timeline, and projects along with that figure being the point of communication for DCEU-related stuff, I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if DC can garner the fans' trust because there's so much trauma that surrounds the DCEU's past. Like, it doesn't help that the effort to build a cinematic universe has failed twice now. I say twice because of two reasons. The first reason is that the Snyderverse was the first go around and that failed. And the second reason being this same article mentions that the CEO of Warner Bros. Discovery wants to realign DC, which basically means that not only are they pivoting from DC's current plan of doing singular projects that don't really mean much in the long run, which is a good thing, and I want to emphasize that, but doesn't that essentially make the Flash's movie pointless now? I mean, sure, we'll still have a movie that'll probably be carried by Michael Keaton's Batman that we can rewatch at any time in the future, but why should we still care about the Flash now if they're going to realign, fix, reset, or whatever word you want to use this cinematic universe again? I guess this means I have to finally answer the question I asked in the beginning of this video. Is it worth fixing the DCEU anymore? Honestly, no, I don't think it's worth it. It just feels so counterintuitive, and I say that despite being interested in projects like Black Adam or Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. The hard truth is that there's just so much turmoil surrounding the DCEU, and the DCEU just has so many hurdles to overcome when it comes to rebooting this universe and trying to make things make sense again, that it feels like it requires a valiant effort. And at that point, why try to overcome so many hurdles when they found a better and more unique style that works for them? They already want to make more movies like Joker, which I'm relieved to see, and Matt Reeves isn't going to stop making his Batman universe, which is very similar to Joker tonally. So go all in on that universe and continue to make those movies. There are so many characters you can give similar Joker-esque movies for, and to give a few examples, Mr. Freeze, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Clayface, or even Bane. None of them even need to fully connect to each other either. You can do cool Easter eggs, like showing clips on a TV or a radio audio playing in a scene mentioning those other events in those hypothetical movies, and it'd work. And if you ever want to bring any of these characters together for an interesting, non-typical superhero or comic book story, screw it, experiment and do that. That'd be so much more interesting because these types of movies are new and people actually enjoy these films. They feel unique, and that's what DC should focus on, making projects that represent their own style and not trying to make movies like Marvel. They've proven that it works. They've proven that people will be all in on a gritty, realistic style set of movies, whether it's a cinematic universe designed by Matt Reeves or solo stories being told for a character like Joker by Todd Phillips. And the best thing is, people legitimately like these movies. People want more of them. People want to see DC do these unique superhero style movies that haven't really been done before because they feel like a breath of fresh air. That is the recipe for success, not trying to reboot a cinematic universe that's broken at its core for the third time and trying to make movies that feel like a ripoff of an already successful cinematic universe. I simply don't think it'll be worth it in the long run.